Hello guys, good day. This is Janessa Panogaling, your reporter. So my topic for today is all about Module 16, the revised Bloom's Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. Before anything else, I'll introduce first my topic outline. So here it goes. First is the original Bloom's Taxonomy that consists of 6 levels. The second one is the revised taxonomy that consists also with the 2 dimensions of the revised taxonomy. The third one and the last part will be reported by one of my groupmates, Miss Osabel. So her topic is all about practical guide to the revised taxonomy, and the last one is the ops and the revised taxonomy or synapse strengthener. Let's go for the discussion now. Before the revised taxonomy produced, I will explain the old taxonomy. So in 1956, the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the Classification of Educational Goals Handbook 1, and Cognitive Domain was published in this year. In 1964, the Affective Domain, the Handbook 2, was published also in this year. Lastly, in 1966, 1970 to 1972, the Taxonomy of Psychomotor Domain was also published in this year. So, I have mentioned earlier about the 3 learning domains. So, first is the cognitive domain. It is about the acquisition of knowledge and ability to recall that knowledge for application. The second part is the affective domain that addresses how individuals receive, respond to, and ultimately internalize stimulus emotionally. The third part is the psychomotor domain that uses physical activity as a way to gain knowledge and skills, like the physiological domain that addresses how a learner's environment and the many elements that impacts the ability to learn. So the purpose of this 3 domain is to develop and deliver the lessons plan completely, which is very useful for teachers and teaching. So it's an integral part of learning processes. It is hence important for teachers in order to ensure that 3 domains of learning, which includes cognitive as processes of mental thinking, which as uses also. And the last part is affective, which is uses on emotions or feelings of one's person. And the last is psychomotor that uses physical actions, physical or kinesthetic to be achieved. So, now we're done to the 3 learning domains. So let's proceed. What is Bloom's taxonomy? So Bloom's taxonomy, it is the model that describes the different levels of learning outcomes, the target for what skills and competencies that the teachers aim to develop and the learners. So I have a little bit questions. So imagine that you already working as a teacher. How would you feel if you will enter in the classroom without specific learning outcomes? Anyone? Anybody from the class? Whom you hear have an idea? Okay, it's meaningless and useless. Why? Because like for example, you were a teacher in the subject of English. Then you are not well prepared to discuss your topic. What will happen? What would be the learning outcomes to their students? So it goes with nothing. That's why we future educators has a lesson plan to guide in order for us to be more fully equipped, wherein lesson plan serve as a guide for the teachers by using in every day, by determining what the students will learn, how the lesson plan will be taught, as well as how learning will be evaluated. Lastly, lesson plans enable teachers to function more effectively in the classroom, like giving a detailed outline, that they want to adhere to teach during each class. So yeah, correct. Well, impressively said. So, what is the purpose of Bloom's taxonomy in the said learning outcomes? So, the purpose of Bloom's taxonomy is to help to the teachers to provide a framework or organization like classifying classroom. So, this lesson objectives is help the teachers to build their lesson through the use of Bloom's taxonomy that aim to reach those objectives by analyzing for what would be the learning outcomes will be learned. Let's proceed to Bloom's taxonomy of cognitive domain. So there are 6 levels. First is knowledge, comprehension, and application that belong to lower order thinking skills, while analysis, synthesis, and evaluation is belong to higher order thinking skills. So let's explain first the lower order thinking skills. So why this following 3 belong though? Why? Because it is the foundation of skills that required to move into higher order thinking. Since they belong to lower order thinking skills, they need to develop more. These following skills that are taught very well in school is very useful in terms of engaging in activities like reading, writing, and memorization. In addition, these lower order thinking skills are basic qualities of one students that develop as they grow, like observing, memorizing, remembering, understanding, applying. So therefore, lower order thinking skills is breaking down into knowledge by its components and determining the relationships of the components to one another, and then how they relate to an overall structure or a task. They're making judgment based on criteria and the standard that uses previously and learning that kind of knowledge. So if a person is unable to achieve all lower order thinking skills and move up to higher order thinking, then this person will not be prepared for real life situation. So why it is important this lower order thinking skills? Because lower order thinking skills needs to be recalled and slightly understood. And also this lower order thinking skills is the foundational skills that we need us to practice in order to move to the highest or the higher order thinking skills. So, example of lower order thinking skills is the comprehension of material, acquisition of knowledge. So first, let's explain the knowledge. Thereby, the first lower order thinking skills that refers to remembering of previously learned material, or what we call a stack knowledge of one's person's mind. Like for example, a child recites the English alphabet, then the child uses his her ability to think critically through remembering. Next is comprehension, which is the second classification level of Bloom's taxonomy that assess through reading comprehension skills by using higher levels of questioning. Students will develop a higher order of thinking, like asking questions before reading can provide the teacher with insights of how the students will process the information. For example, of comprehension is pre-reading. So it uses more on understanding. So pre-reading questions can assist learners with making connections and generating interest in the story or in a text. So you can use questions that allow students to predict what the text will be about. So let's proceed to the post-reading questions. It is useful that help to the students to process new information. It helps the student to progress through the levels of learning. Like for example, you can ask questions that lead to analysis and application, wherein this ability is through understanding the meaning of what is known. For example, verb is classifying, cite, explain, illustrate. Like for example, the situation. How would you illustrate the water cycle? What is the main idea of the story in the world is an apple? Or another situation, summarize the story of the world is an apple. And that would be one of the explanations and examples. Let's proceed to the third level of lower order thinking skills, which is application. So this application refers to the ability to use and learn material in new concrete situation. This may include the application of such things as rules, methods, concepts, principles, laws, and theories. So these learning outcomes require a higher level of understanding than those of comprehension. So it's gonna be different. Like for example, applying the rules of subject-verb agreement when writing a summary of the story and the world is an apple. Like that. So let's proceed to higher order thinking skills. So this concept is tend to become the highest levels where distinguishes critical thinking skills from low order learning outcomes, such as those attained by rote of memorization. So higher order thinking skills include the following verb, which is synthesizing, analyzing, reasoning, comprehending, application, and evaluation. So this higher order thinking skills is based on preview various taxonomies of learning, that particularly the one created by Benjamin Bloom in his book 1956, which is the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, the classification of educational goals. The higher order thinking skills are reflected by the top 3 levels in Bloom's taxonomy. So why higher order thinking skills are important? Anyone? Anybody? So it is important because they can make critical interpretations and demonstrate high levels of insight and sophistication in their thinking. They are able to make inferences, draw relevant and insightful conclusions, by use their knowledge and use situations and relate their thinking to other situations and to their own background knowledge. However, you define higher order thinking as the goal to get students move beyond by simply recalling facts on demand and start using knowledge in a complex ways. So higher order thinking skills very important component in the first century skills. So the skills that are most in demand. So how to achieve higher order thinking skills? Anybody? Okay. In order to reach the higher level of thinking skills, you have to achieve first the lower order thinking skills in order for you to make the top of learning outcomes. Example of higher order thinking skills is those students who employ high order thinking skills understand, for example, how to analyze the situation, the problem, like that, and also evaluate complex information, categorize, manipulate, and connect facts, troubleshoot for solutions, understanding concept, connection, and big picture thinking, problem solving, ideate and develop insightful reasoning, like that. So let's proceed to the 4th level of Bloom's taxonomy, which is analysis. So what is analysis, by the way? Anybody? Okay. Yes, analysis involves students use their own judgment, that begin analyzing the knowledge that they have to learn. So at this point, they begin understanding by underlying structure of knowledge, and also they are able to distinguish between fact and opinion. Some example of analysis would be analyze each statement to decide whether it's fact or opinion, compare and contrast the beliefs of the story, like that. And also apply the rule of 70 to determine how quickly your money will double at 6% interest. And the last is illustrate the differences between the American alligator and the Nile crocodile. So one of that is the example. Let's proceed to the fifth level of Bloom's taxonomy, which is synthesis. So what is synthesis all about? Anybody? Okay. I will be the one to explain. So synthesis requires students to infer relationships among sources such as essays, articles, works of fiction, lectures by instructors, and even personal observations. Like for example, a student might infer a relationship between what she has read in a newspaper or an article and what she has observed herself. So the high-level thinking of synthesis is evident when students put the parts or information they have reviewed together in order to create new meaning or a new structure. So at the synthesis level, students move beyond relying on previously learned information, like analyzing items that the teacher is giving to them. Some questions in the educational setting that would involve the synthesis might include for what alternative would you suggest for, like that. One of the example and synthesis level. And also, what changes would you make to revise? And the last, what could you invent to solve? So it is breaking down to its parts, like that. Lastly, to explain is the evaluation. It is the top level of Bloom's taxonomy that involves students making judgment about the value of ideas, items, and materials, because at this level, students are expected to mentally assemble all they have learned to make informed and sound evaluations of the material. So some questions involving evaluation might be evaluate the bill of rights and determine which is the less necessary for a free society, like that. Another example is attend a local play and write a critique of the actor's performance. And the last example is visit an art museum and offer suggestions on how ways to improve a specific exhibit, like that. So let's proceed to the conclusion. So therefore, the top 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy, which is often displayed as a pyramid with ascending levels of thinking at the top of the structure, or analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So these following 3 levels of higher order thinking skills. So these levels of the taxonomy involve critical thinking. So the students who are able to think are those who can apply the knowledge and skills that they have learned in new context. So looking at each level demonstrate how higher order thinking is applied in education. So let's proceed to the revised taxonomy. After 45 years since the publication of Bloom's taxonomy, there are 2 new group experts, who is Lauren Anderson and David Cratwell, who is the Bloom's former student, that lead an expert group to work together so that they can make and create the revised taxonomy. So this 2 person is very important because they will be the one that revise this kind of Bloom's taxonomy. So they are the new group of experts. So below are the silent differences between the old and the revised taxonomies. The use of action words instead of nouns was done to highlight that thinking in order to active the process of learning in the revised taxonomy. So, like for example, analyze instead of analysis. So, analyze is the verb revised taxonomy, while the analysis is the noun old taxonomy. So like that. So let's proceed to the second one, which is evaluate. So much for that. While the revised taxonomy remains to be in hierarchical levels of increasing complexity, it is intended to be more flexible. In that way, it allows the categories to overlap. Like for example, some action words and apply level is the prepare, change, and produce. So like that. Therefore, apply is the verb revised taxonomy, while the application is the noun revised taxonomy. Proceed to the remember. So it is the verb revised taxonomy, while the knowledge is the noun old taxonomy. So the knowledge level was changed to remember. The change was made because knowledge does not refer to a cognitive or thinking. So much for that. Knowledge is the object of the thinking. Remember is a more appropriate word for the first thinking level, which involves recalling information and retrieving stacked knowledge. Like that. Next is understand level, which is involve the verb revised taxonomy. While understand is the noun's old taxonomy that the teachers likely to use the word understanding when referring to their work rather than comprehension. So the understand level was changed to comprehension level. As part would be a create level, which revise the verb taxonomy, while the synthesis is the noun old taxonomy that was placed to the highest level. The next discussion is about the original Bloom's taxonomy, cognitive domain levels, and their subcategories. First is knowledge. So 1.1, knowledge of specific that consists of terminology and specific facts. So this knowledge involves the recall of specifics and universals, including the recalling of methods and processes, or the recalling of a pattern or a structure or setting. So the example verb for this is define, describe, draw, identify, level, locate, memorize, name, recite, recognize, select, state, and write. So this or the following verb example and the cognitive domain levels. So proceed to the 1.2, knowledge of ways and means of dealing with the specifics that involve conventions, trends, and sequences, classifications and categories, criteria, and methodology. Let's proceed to 1.3, knowledge of universals and abstractions in the field. Like 1.3.1, the principles and generalizations, theories and structures. So that would be the categories or the subcategories for the knowledge. So knowledge that involves any criticize or critically thinking by the use of one's person's mind. Next is comprehension subcategories that so it involves translation, interpretation, and extrapolation. This explains that it is the type of understanding or apprehension such that individual knowledge who knows what is being communicated and can make use of the material or an idea that being communicated by one another, or without necessarily relating to the other material or seeing its the fullest of implications. So example verb for this is paraphrase, summarize, restate, retell, and illustrate. So I have mentioned earlier about the discussion I have been given, that comprehension, it is something that you will summarize the story of an apple, like you can how the story will be illustrated. Next is the subcategories of applications that uses and abstractions in a particular and concrete situations and in a real world situations. So this example verbs would be apply, change, prepare, and produce. So applying from the word application. So you have to apply the knowledge that you've got from your previous learnings, like so far, so on. So what would be your experiences to relate in real life situations in order for you to learn more effectively. The next subcategories would be the analysis. It represents the breakdown of a communication into its constituent elements or parts, such that relative hierarchy of ideas is made clear and or the relations between ideas or expressed to become more explicit. So for this, it involves the elements, the relationships, and the organizational principles. So the sample verbs for this kind of subcategories would be the analyze, subdivide, take apart, investigate, compare, contrast, and infer. So it is more on inquiry approach, like you are curious with that particular situations. So you have to analyze that kind of situations in order for you to find out the answers, because you are so curious for that kind of inquiry. So you need to investigate that in order for you to know or what would be the possible answers for that kind of investigating, like that. So like for example, you are comparing and contrasting the qualities of the character in the story of The World is an Apple. So one of that is the example of analysis. So you are comparing and contrasting for that character of the story. Yes, let's proceed to the subcategories of synthesis. It is the production of unique communication. The second part would be the production of a plan or proposed set of operations. And then number 3 is derivation of a set of abstract relations. So much for that. It explains that putting together of elements and parts so that it will be formed as a whole. So like for example, verb for this is combine, organize, design, and formulate. Like for example, you are writing a song that expressing the message or the lesson of the story. Like for example, The World is an Apple. You have to write it down for what would be the message that you will understand in the story. So you are expressing your thought, your emotions for that. So you can combine and create the story, or you can create a song that express for what we have learned in the said story. The last part would be the subcategories of evaluation. So number 1, in terms of internal evidence. From the word internal, it is insight. The second would be in terms of external evidence. So it is from the word external. It is outside. So it is based for the judgment about the value of material and methods for the given purposes. Like, for example, the students can now assess or judge based on a set of standards and what they have learned. So they are evaluating their learnings. So the sample verb for this is assess, appraise, critique, judge, and recommend. So for example, as the story of the world is an apple, so you are writing a critique of the authors and writing that story. So you are critically judging those kind of recommendations of the said story. The last part is the Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives that consists of Bloom's taxonomy cognitive domains. So first one is all taxonomy that involve only one dimension. So first is the knowledge. The second part would be the comprehension. The third part is the application. The fourth one is analysis. The fifth part is synthesis. And the sixth part would be the evaluation. The Bloom's taxonomy cognitive domain now includes two dimensions. First dimension of the revised taxonomy is the cognitive dimension. The second part of the dimension is the knowledge. So the knowledge dimension of the revised taxonomy was based on the subcategories of the knowledge in the old taxonomy that I haven't discussed earlier or in a while ago. So in cognitive dimension, it would be the revised taxonomy of first remember, second understand, third apply, fourth analyze, the fifth is evaluate, and the last part would be to create. Let's go for the knowledge dimension that has four categories. First is factual, that based on facts, it is more on it is factual information. The second part is conceptual, it is based on concepts of knowledge. The third part is procedural, it is more on the procedure of the material. And the last part would be the metacognitive or the metacognition. It is something, the awareness of one's person. It is how the person aware or view things in life, or how the way he or aware of the society, on the environment. It is something like how the way she feel like that. That's the end of my report. Thank you for listening.